Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to preview regionals in the SEC, 13 of them.
Yep.
8 of them hosted, 5 of them. I was checking my math. That's always a good idea for me. 5 of them as 2s and 3s. We will go one by one, go through all of them, just give you some little tidbits here and there to get you ready for the weekend that is. Before we get started on anything else, though, I have to remind you that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is your new home for Jordan Brand. Gear up today and take flight. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan gear for the entire family, available in-store and at academy.com. Unleash your greatness with Jordan Brand, now at Academy. All right, this show, we're going to work on efficiency here today because Mark really fought it in Hoover last week, heroically, I would say. And while he is now fully on the mend and feeling good, his voice is still working its way back. His voice is still very much in rehab.
It's on a pitch count.
That's right. Yeah, still working its way back up to strength. So you might hear a little bit more of my voice. For better or worse, I don't have that syrupy accent, so it's not quite as pleasing. But we're gonna do what we can to save Mark's voice as we go through these. So, but yeah, so the basic function, the basic plan here is we're going to start by talking about all the host regionals in numerical order. So we're going to start with Vanderbilt, obviously. We'll go through those. Then we'll go through the places where all the SEC teams are 2s and 3s. Those are in really no particular order, but by the time we're done here, we will have talked about every regional involving an SEC team. So we'll make sure to get you ready.
And that's all but 3 of them. So
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Get
ready. Exactly. Strap in. And we'll move through it as quickly as possible without, just speed running through it. So let's start at the top, Mark. Vanderbilt, number 1 overall seed. I think by the time they lifted the trophy on Sunday in Hoover, kind of felt like that's the way it was trending.
Yeah.
And boy, just playing really well right now. Best baseball they've played in not just this season, but since 2021, maybe, that was the last rocker lighter team for Vanderbilt. And it might be the best they played since then. A team that I've been asked on radio a bunch about it this week, a team that I feel a lot better about now than I did 6 weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
Just totally different. I thought 6 weeks ago, I would have thought, okay, yeah, regional team and, having a nice year, but not really a threat, to get to Omaha and win a national title. And now they've really changed their entire outlook. And they are hosting Louisville as the 2 seed, East Tennessee State as the 3 seed, and Wright State as the 4 seed. Generally speaking, I think a fairly good draw. The Louisville name might be scary, but this is not the Louisville of 5 to 7 years ago necessarily. It is a good team, not a great team. They're more offense focused than they are pitching wise. I think Vanderbilt could probably get some things done against their pitching. East Tennessee State, no guarantee that Vanderbilt sees them, but I think they could be a tricky opponent if the ball is flying at Hawkins, and sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's not one of the ballparks in the league that always is one way or the other. There's a lot of power on the ETSU team. And so it is one where if you get into an ugly kind of game where you've got to score runs in bunches, ETSU, they may not be good enough to win that game, but they're going to be ready to play that kind of game. That's their kind of party. And I mentioned the 4 seed Wright State team that's been in regionals a bunch. They don't typically win. Lately, have not won a ton of games in regionals of late, but they're there a bunch. So not a team that's really going to freak out in that moment. I almost used a more vivid and vulgar example there, but they're not going to freak out in that moment. But generally speaking, and Mark, I'll turn it over to you here. Like generally speaking, I feel like a pretty reasonable draw for Vanderbilt. Nothing too understanding that anything can happen. They lost a game to Xavier 2 years ago and got shut out maybe, or scored 1 run or something. But still, I think this is a pretty good draw for the Commodores.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to that Sunday where they had the great comeback against Alabama, where they were basically buried, 2 outs in the 8th inning, the bases empty, down 5 runs, 6 runs, whatever it was, and came back and won. And then since then, They won at Tennessee. They swept Kentucky with 2 walk-offs, and they rolled through the SEC tournament. This is, to your point, the last not even 6 weeks. I think 3-4 weeks. They went from a fringe host that we weren't even sure we're going to host. We thought they would, but there's certainly nothing guaranteed. To the number 1 overall seed and a team that I would be pretty comfortable picking them to win the whole thing, and I would not have thought that a month ago. The thing about Vanderbilt that really strikes me is the run prevention. Their pitching staff misses a lot of bats. Okay. It's a really, really heavy on stuffs and strikeouts without having a ton of pro prospects, which is a lot of times doesn't really align. The other thing is they play tremendous defense, and they take away extra base hits, and they don't give you a lot. And I think when you put those together, you strike out a lot of guys, and when the ball gets put in play, you catch it and throw them out. That gives you a huge leg up, and you don't have to be this dynamic offense. Meanwhile, their offense is improving, and now it's a lot more impressive than it was, say, a month ago. So I really feel like this is a Vanderbilt team that, give Corbin credit. They've gelled at the right time. They have made the offseason changes in the staff, and I think they do have a more dynamic offense now. I think they're more physical than they were, and they're certainly a team that seems to maybe have a little bit more edge than perhaps in past years. And that seems to be paying dividends, because I really like where they are as a team right now. I think they're going to win this regional, and I don't know who they'll play next, but Southern Miss, Alabama, Miami, or Columbia. But I would like their chances at home against anyone right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. So many interesting things with this Vanderbilt team. Our friend Arya Gerson has mentioned it before, that one of the interesting things about this pitching staff is, you're right, that they miss a lot of bats. They don't get hit hard, but it's not the way it used to look at Vanderbilt, where it's here's 90, 97 coming right at you. Now it's, JD Thompson is pretty firm with his fastball, but it's Cody Bowker and Connor Fennell and, the various bullpen guys, where it's a lot of movement on the fastball, or fastballs that look like they're taking off and they're carrying through the zone. And it's good stuff, but it's sometimes when people say stuff, what they really mean is velocity. In Vanderbilt's case, stuff in some cases means velocity, but in more cases means movement and deception and tunneling and all that stuff. So they were a lot of fun to watch in Hoover. Not a single error across 3 games. Gave up 3 runs across 3 games. That's going to win you a lot of baseball games. And so to your point, so I'm with you. I feel very good about Vanderbilt coming through this regional. Don't not one of the regionals I think is more dangerous for the host here.
Yeah.
Let's move on to number 2. That's Texas. This is a regional where Kendall will be, so make sure you're following his coverage this weekend. TBD on some of the locations, so there will be, just because I don't mention someone going there doesn't mean there's nobody going there. Some of it's still being shaken out. Texas has UTSA as the 2, K-State as the 3, Houston Christian as the 4. All due respect to Houston Christian, great story, but I think the 2 and the 3 are the things to touch on here with regards to what they might be able to do with Texas. And I don't know who is more negatively or positively affected by having seen the other when it comes to Texas and UTSA, because UTSA has beaten Texas this season. So on one hand, you could say, well, they're not going to be intimidated. And it's like, okay, well, that may be true. But the flip side is, like, is UTSA going to beat Texas twice in the same season, right? And that just seems like something that would be hard to, certainly capable, but that just seems like that'd be a hard thing to pull off. And then for K-State, I saw them play in person against Kansas this season, and I think K-State was the more talented of the 2 teams, but they just have some deficiencies in terms of doing some of the small things. They're kind of like the opposite of Vanderbilt in some ways, not in a literal sense, but just like they have the stuff you can't teach in spades. Like they got dudes who are athletic and dudes who throw hard and dudes who, hit the ball 500 feet. But then, like, they also, in the games I've seen, have 1 or 2 plays a game that are just like defensive miscues or base running miscues or just the guy throws hard, but he just can't command it. Like, it's a lot of that stuff, and that really holds them back. But I do think there's some danger in that, because if they can put together a clean weekend, which they haven't done a ton of, like, they are talented enough to give Texas problems. And Texas is a team, and I include the SEC tournament in this, like, just hasn't been the same team over the last three or 4 weeks. And so does Texas get turned around, headed the right direction, or is this going to be a continuation of what we've seen the last few weeks? And if it is the latter, I think they could get pushed in this regional a little bit.
Yeah. Well, certainly Kansas State won they won the Fayetteville Regional a year ago. So for the holdovers, I know they lost a lot, but for those guys, they know what it looks like. I do agree with Texas. Since Jared Spencer has gone and everyone's had to shuffle and move around, it's not the same on the mound, even though a lot of the same pitchers are in similar roles. Everybody's been shuffled, and they've got to get more out of some different pitchers. It'll be fascinating to see how Max Wiener and Jim Schlossnagle handle the rotation, because with Houston Christian, this is an opportunity that they could not throw one of their top two guys and still win with offense and still treat it like a quote midweek game. The question is, okay, anytime you do that, you open yourself up to criticism, and if it goes wrong, and certainly, that'll be fascinating to see which way they lean. I'm really interested to see what Ruger Riojas does if he pitches against UTSA. That's where he played last year. That could be a juicy sidebar story for this regional. Certainly, they would know him, but he would know a lot of their players as well. And he's an emotional, confident guy anyway. I think that would be good theater. And then offensively, Blue's back. You've got Flores. You've got different guys in the lineup that are legitimate potential stars. What does that look like? Kimball Husler. I mean, Rylan Galvan. You got some really, really good professional older hitters who have looked for this moment, and you've got the home regional, and here's a chance to really cement your legacy on the way out. And I feel like Texas is in position where, even if the pitching is maybe not what it was with Spencer, I think they're still in a position where the offense can pick up some slack, and that can carry them to at least get them through until they get to Grubbs and Volantis at the end. And I feel like that's an advantage, right? They're going to have it on just about anyone. So again, I like Texas in this one, and feel like that while it could be a little bit rocky for parts of the weekend, that they'll end up winning it. And if the other part I would mention is, if they do have to go into the losers bracket, that's where it could get a little dicey, just for what we talked about, because they're just a guy short.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like, it always gets tough if you get pushed in the losers bracket, but if you're a little short on the mound, that's obviously even more so. Because we kind of glazed over it, I'll give a quick note on Houston Christian. Player to watch: Parker Edwards, their best starting pitcher and their team leader in home runs. So there you go. Somebody to watch there. All right, number 3 seed is Arkansas. They've got Kansas as the 2, Creighton as the 3, North Dakota State as the 4. No disrespect to North Dakota State, one of the weaker 4s, so you feel pretty good about that. Arkansas being able to pitch off, and not just pitch off with the starter, but probably honestly like work from the bottom up, bullpen wise, to get that done, at least from Arkansas standpoint. You hope so. The team to watch here is Kansas. Creighton has had a nice year. I don't think I fully internalized how good a year Creighton's had. They've won 41 games, so really nice year, but they're just not very physical offensively. So I worry about, if Arkansas is swinging it well, I just worry a little bit about Creighton's ability to keep up in that situation. But Kansas kind of feels like they're there for it. Now, I feel very good about Arkansas in this regional. I previewed this one for our site and gave it a very high probability of Arkansas coming through it. But the one kind of tricky situation, it's kind of twofold. Kansas's pitchers, especially in the rotation, Dom Vagley, Cooper Moore, they're sinker ball guys. And if they get a bunch of ground balls, if they're on, that obviously makes it turns out, Mark, if you're hitting the ball on the ground, it's hard to hit the ball out of the ballpark.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
So if they're getting ground balls by the bushel, it does make it a little more difficult. And Kansas has an offense that, they're willing to scrap with you. I don't know if they're going to be good enough. I don't think they're going to be good enough, I guess I should say. But that is their kind of party. And sometimes, it's like they say never to wrestle the pig in mud because the pig is enjoying it and he has experience,
Yeah.
Like that's Kansas. Like they've won games like that. They're willing to use a bunch of bullpen and, just slug with you. I think Arkansas would still win that type of game, but it would get a little bit dicier. But high level of confidence here with Arkansas, just with that draw. Feels like there's, one dangerous team, and then certainly if Creighton beats Kansas in that opener, then I think it really opens the door for Arkansas to kind of cruise through this thing.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see how Arkansas just handles the moment. We all love the talent. I think we keep coming back to this line, their best is the best in the country. How will they approach it mentally? It's the whole postseason thing in Baum Walker hasn't gone well the last 3 opportunities. They need to put that behind them. And I think getting off to a good start is the first step to that. So it will be interesting to see how they work their pitching, because the last thing you want is to come out and, give up a big inning early, and have everybody start to get all angsty. Okay. So that will be fascinating just to see. And I'm sure Dave will handle that appropriately, because this is a team that can win it all. And we've been looking at this since we really got to look to see how good this lineup projected to be. And one of the things that's really fascinating for me is they just hit the ball. They got so many guys who hit the ball hard. And you mentioned the Kansas sinker ballers. If you're hitting the ball hard on the ground, those are double plays. So that's going to be fascinating to see, can they get more lift? Can they get more line drives and versus just trying to, hit the ball 500 feet. And I think that's going to be a key for Arkansas to see how well they adjust. Because if they're kind of scuffling and they're hitting in the double plays, and every time they get a man on base, they don't get anything out of it, that stuff kind of builds, right? And it gets in your head. And that way, when you mentioned Kansas just kind of hanging around, here we are at the end, that would concern me. I think for Arkansas, they need to go out and just put their foot down and take this early. And then, it's none of this. Let's let it play out and see how it's going to happen. I think it's really important for them to get off to a good start.
Agreed. Yeah, because I should have mentioned that. Like, there's the whole scar tissue of lost home regionals, and that stuff doesn't matter until it does, right? You can say all the right things in the world of it's a different team, different regional, but the minute things
feel it, you feel it. It's palpable in the stadium at times when you go through something like that.
Yeah, as soon as the friction happens, everyone all of a sudden gets that kind of the PTSD of that situation. The 4 seed is Auburn. That is where I will be. That is where I am, as a matter of fact, sitting in a hotel room in Auburn. They have NC State as the 2, Stetson as the 3. The 4 is Central Connecticut State. That opening matchup against Central Connecticut, they're going to be overmatched, but the leading hitter in the country plays for Central Connecticut, Aiden Redahan. He's batting .458, which I'm told is pretty good. Yeah. So there's that.
Get it done.
Yeah. NC State's interesting. They probably have the most dependable rotation in this regional. They've used basically the same 3 guys all year. Their ceiling is kind of limited, but they're all good. Stetson is interesting too. Like, a couple of really interesting players there. They catch a break, and that Stetson has a very good ace named Jonathan Gonzalez, whose ERA is below 2. Opponent batting average is below 200. Bunch of strikeouts, not a lot of walks. I'm assuming they'll have to use him against NC State. So, and it drops off pretty quick after that. So I think that's a break for Auburn. Isaiah Barquette is the top hitter for Stetson. He has struck out 8 times all season, 240 at-bats, 8 strikeouts. So that dude's putting the ball in play, and he has 30 stolen bases, so he can really run. But the key for me, Mark, with Auburn is what do they get from starting pitchers not named Sam Dutton? And that's just been the question so often this season, because I think they're going to be fine offensively in this regional, especially once you get past the everybody's first line of pitchers. It's just can Tilly and Chatterton and Andreas Alvarez maybe can they give Auburn enough of what they need to where they're not having to burn through a bunch of bullpen?
And even Dutton, the last couple of starts, I don't know if he's kind of worn down. I mean, he's pitched a lot this year and been so good all year. Him not throwing in Hoover is probably a good thing. Just kind of get a reset. I think they did like a simulated game. Yes, typically what you do if you don't get a game action. So him being able to come back and be what he was, say in April, that changes Auburn. That makes them a national title threat because he was that good. And with Tilly, we all love the stuff. It's just, can he repeat it? Can he get you deeper in games? And he's certainly been pitch better as we go, as the season's gone on. And then the other part for them is Hensler and Carson Myers in the bullpen kind of gives, a two-headed monster out there, and they're multi-inning guys. So, you can bring them in the sixth and they might finish it, that kind of guy. So I'm interested to see just how Auburn uses their pitchers, who they throw in the opener. Do you throw Dutton? Do you throw Tilly? What does that look like? And then also, they've been so good at home. It's such a offensive team with all that ability. Ike Irish might have been the best hitter in the conference, certainly the second half of the year. There's a lot to like about that Auburn team, and I still don't think they've hit their ceiling. I think they're still one of those teams trending up. However, when you have all those young players in key roles, it's a huge moment. It's the most pressure they've been under. How do they handle it? And that's part of what all teams have to deal with, and Auburn's going to find out what they've got this weekend. I do like Auburn to win that regional, but NC State, a team that just a few weeks ago we thought they were going to win the ACC, and they didn't finish strong. But it's a talented team. They've got enough pitching that they could certainly win this regional. And for Auburn, you're going to get a test.
100%. I'm excited to see it. I've also heard a lot of good things about Stetson and their players. That's not necessarily going to be a walk in the park if it ends up being the matchup as well. Let's move on to LSU, the 6th overall seed. To me, Mark, this is maybe the softest regional.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I went when we were filling out our little regional things we all do. Like, I saw that you had already chosen this one, so I went somewhere else just for variety's sake. But I do agree with you. You've got DBU as the 2, Rhode Island as the 3, Little Rock as the 4. Little Rock's a team that kind of the year after the year, they actually were really talented last year and then lost everybody. And somehow they parlayed that into making a regional. Just got hot. Number 8 seed in the OVC tournament. They got hot. They won it. Kudos to them. But again, probably one of the weaker 4s. Rhode Island had a really nice year. I don't totally understand why their RPI is so good. And they beat Oregon early in the season, but other than that, I'm not entirely sure. But their RPI is in the top 70, so they got pushed up to the 3 line. But that feels more like a 4 to me. And then DBU is a really good team. I think anybody who follows college baseball knows that to be true. But they've played in Conference USA all year, and they've not consistently seen the type of talent they're going to see if indeed it is matchups with LSU in the 1-0 game and then again in the regional final. How does that? Do they have enough depth to be competitive at the business end of this regional? If the answer is no, this could be one of those regionals where squeeze play spends 0 time on it because it's just LSU just tidal waving their way through it. I could definitely see that being on the table.
Yeah. I think DBU it's a good enough to press LSU a little bit. I do feel like Rhode Island and Little Rock they're not going to be able to push LSU. Maybe they can push DBU. We'll see. I feel like LSU is going to roll through this. They're not going to lose. I think the big question for me is how they use their pitching. you recall in Hoover, they threw Anderson and Ianson in the same game, so they would have some flexibility to bring either back. And I think that was on a Friday. And then they threw Jaden Newt on Saturday, and he pitched well. What do you do in your opener? If do you throw Anderson or Ianson? I think you could get away with against Little Rock. You would assume you would be able to get away with your third or fourth pitcher. Newt through Saturday, that would be bringing him back a day early, but he didn't throw that long. Maybe that's the play. Do you throw a guy like William Schmidt, who's supremely talented, but is a true freshman, hasn't he hasn't been in these kind of big situations before? Or Connor Ware is a guy who's really talented, but just hadn't thrown enough strikes. Case and Evans, what do you do in that opening game? Because you do have plenty of options. And I do think that LSU's offense is good enough that they're going to be able to score enough runs that they don't have to be perfect on the mound in that opener. So to me, that's as fascinating. I love this kind of strategy stuff. That's as fascinating to me because I do think that it's going to take a really good team to go into Alex Box and beat them in the postseason. Maybe there's a super regional team to do it, but I don't think it's one of these three teams in the regional round.
Agreed. Yeah, I just have a hard time seeing it. Let's talk about Georgia, the number 7 seed. They've got Duke as the 2, Oklahoma State as the 3, and Binghamton as the 4. I think Duke could be a tricky matchup if that's where it ends up coming, whether it's a 1-0 game or the regional final or both, just because it feels like Duke is going to be able to take advantage of the ballpark in the same way that Georgia does. Duke's got 99 runs on the year. They've got a centerpiece in their lineup in Ben Miller, who's hit 18 home runs this season. Like, they are going to be the type of team, I think, that can play Georgia and allow Georgia to hit their solo home runs and then hit plenty of their own, right? As long as they limit base runners otherwise. Now, the tricky part is kind of like similar to Georgia, where, Duke doesn't, where it's different is Duke doesn't have like any set starting rotation at all. It's like they have a whole bunch of dudes that have started between 5 and 9 games. They're just playing matchups. And that can be tricky because if you're Georgia and you're looking at trying to figure out scouting reports, like, you're going to spend time on everybody because you really don't know who they're going to throw. And, mostly it's been a home and road thing for Georgia, but they have had weekends, even some at home, where they've just been kind of flat, and they haven't played up to their potential. And you just wonder is that something that could crop up again? Now, Oklahoma State is certainly talented. They're a little bit of a tricky 3 just because it's like, are they the team that we had ranked in the preseason, or were they a team that just had a good week at the Big 12 tournament and leading up to it a good couple weeks, and really they're not a threat? I genuinely don't know. Like, it's a little bit of a blind spot for me. But between Duke and Oklahoma State, I have to imagine that Georgia will get pushed a little bit by one of the two.
Yeah, I would think so. And Georgia, for me, it comes down to which offensive lineup do you see, because they have gone through some stretches where they just murdered opposing pitching, especially at home. And it's not always the case, and they don't have to beat you that way. They can certainly pitch well enough and beat you in other ways. But when you get that version of Neanderthal slugging, hitting every ball out of the park, just, hey, we're just gonna, here it is. We're just better than you version of Georgia. That's the scary one. And I don't know, if Duke or Oklahoma State's going to be able to hold up to that if they get that version. It's just, are we going to get that version? And I do think that on the mound for Georgia, for me, it's all about how many strikes they throw. The velocity's great. They're gonna miss bats, but are they going to throw strikes? And if they do, they've got enough arms and enough options to mix and match and throw different guys out there. And Brian Curley's a star, and Leighton Finley is he's a guy you can depend on. But they've got some others out there who are super talented, but that you look at their numbers and their production is up and down. They may be great one day and not the next. And when you have that kind of upside, it gives you hope. But you're also wondering, when you go out, are they going to give up 3 before you can get them out of there? And that to me gives me pause, especially a team like Oklahoma State, who's, they've got a lot of power. That ballpark they should be able to it should fit. And then Duke certainly can hit the ball out of the yard as well. So I think that Georgia, I would favor them to win this, but it maybe not by as much as some of the others that we've talked about.
Certainly seems like it's going to be high scoring, kind of regardless. You're just going to have to be okay with that, winning with some big crooked numbers.
Yeah, the trees are not going to starve at Foley.
That's right. That's right. Real quick before we get to the second half of our regional preview weekends, this will give Mark a chance to get a drink, maybe hit that cough drop or something for a second. But we have to give a shout out to one of our other sponsors, and that's Tecovas Boots. Whether it's the leather in your glove or your tailgating chairs, baseball people know that quality matters. That's why we love Tecovas Boots. Born in Texas, handcrafted with over 200 meticulous steps and comfortable from day one, they're perfect for wherever the college baseball season takes you. From road trips to rivalry games, post-game celebrations, or just everyday wear, Tecovas boots are made to go the distance. Find your perfect pair today at Tecovas. All right, Mark, that brings us to Oxford, the number 10 seed that is Ole Miss. They've got 2 seed Georgia Tech, 3 seed Western Kentucky, and 4 seed Murray State. And this, to me, is an answer when I've been asked on radio about toughest regionals hosted by an SEC team. This one comes up for me. And I think there's a couple of reasons why, kind of on both ends of the bracket here. So I think what starts as tricky about it is that Murray State can really hit. And, we'll see what decision they end up making, but I kind of feel like they're going to have to throw Hunter Elliott just to be sure. I don't know that you can afford to get too cute here.
I don't know. Nichols has been really good lately.
If he's healthy, right? Like he didn't pitch in Hoover, and Bianco was talking about he has a strained oblique. Like he wasn't on the roster in Hoover. Now that was a decision, you have to make that decision before the week starts. And so by the end of the week, maybe he was fine. But, but yes, regardless of who's on the mound, I can see the scenario now, which is just, yes, you beat Murray State, but it was 11-9 and you used 6 pitchers and it took 4.5 hours and, just like all that stuff. Right. And then it's like, you already feel like you kind of feel like you're in the loser's bracket because you're having to like claw out of this game. So there's that. And then on the other end of it, it's, a Georgia Tech team that had a reasonable case to host. I kind of had them at the back of the group that we were talking about, but had a case. Has the sentimental thing with Danny Hall retiring, and I don't think we can discount that. I mean, he is certainly one of those coaches his players really like and tend to want to play well for him. So there's that. Oh, by the way, Drew Burris plays for that team. And their pitching is better than it's been. This is not necessarily your older brother's Georgia Tech. Like it's not a great pitching staff. It's not Coastal Carolina in terms of like pitching depth and what have you. Like that's a team I just saw, so it's on my mind. Or Georgia in terms of the pitching depth, but it's a lot better. And then Western Kentucky can really pitch it, which is rare in this field. It feels like we're in this era of college baseball where everybody can hit, but they're a little bit of the opposite there, where like pitching is where their bread is buttered, and we'll see how it holds up against 3 really good offenses in this regional. It feels like a regional where we're going to find out a lot about how good Western Kentucky pitching like is or isn't against top flight offenses, because there are 3 of them in this regional. But it just feels like this is if Ole Miss gets out of this regional at home, it's going to have really earned it.
Yeah. Agree. I do think that this is as challenging a regional as we have. I feel like Ole Miss is a team that, 2 weeks ago, they weren't going to host. They win the Auburn series, which puts them in position. And then they make it all the way to the finals in Hoover. Pitch really well. They do it without, one of their key starters. And I feel like offensively, it's a team, especially at home in that ballpark. They're gonna put up some big cuts and have some beer showers, and it's gonna be quite a scene, especially warm weather. Maybe get a little wind involved. I think this could be another high scoring regional, kind of like what we talked about in Athens. I do feel like it's a home field advantage. everyone has a home field advantage, but I think this one is kind of like LSU, kind of like where Arkansas, kind of like Tennessee at times, where you can Mississippi State when they're rolling, you can impact the game, and I feel like this is an opportunity for Ole Miss to maybe that puts them over the top. I am concerned for them with the whole Danny Hall narrative and win one for the outgoing coach. We've all seen it. That it happens. It's real. Teams get inspired. The baseball gods smile on you. Whatever it is, and weird stuff happens, and those kind of coaches end up getting one last moment. And so that this one for me is, I'd say maybe 50-50 between Georgia Tech and Ole Miss. I know Ole Miss is at home playing well, but if I'm a Rebel, I'm a little more concerned than maybe I would be if it was Danny Healy coaching, and that we didn't have all this history and he's going on his way out, right? I feel like it's that those kinds of things tend to, I don't know, maybe it's a sports writer in me talking, but those kind of things tend to come true. So I'm rambling a bit, but I do feel like this is one of those regionals that I'm going to be glued to because I feel like something fascinating is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go back that far in history. I think there was a little bit of this when Paul Maneri retired from LSU. They went on the road up to, if I remember correctly, Oregon State for that regional, and I think lost their opener against Gonzaga. Actually, I do remember that because it was the Gonzaga pitcher that was like the low slot guy who was throwing like 83 miles an hour from down. Yeah. So, and then I think shut him out or gave up one run, something like that. But they came back to win that regional. And so it's that kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, much like that LSU team, it's not like Georgia Tech's, trying to, get 125 cents on the dollar for their talent. Like if they just play up to their talent level, they're going to be right there.
They got dudes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Tennessee, the last host numerically here, the 14 seed. They've got Wake Forest as the 2, Cincinnati as the 3, Miami of Ohio as the 4. A couple interesting things here. One is a little bit like in the Auburn regional. I do think Tennessee catches a bit of a break in that Wake Forest is almost certainly going to give the ball to Brady Morningstar to pitch against Cincinnati. He's their kind of one and only dependable week-to-week guy. He's the guy you don't want to see. They're going to have to use him. They're going to have to use him before any sort of matchup with Tennessee. So that's a break there. Another interesting thing is how Tennessee, if it's Cincinnati, how that goes, because Cincinnati is ready to run all over you. 128 stolen bases on the year. I saw one of the Tennessee beat writers, might have been Ryan Shumpert yesterday, tweeted about as of now, Tony expects to use Liam Doyle in the opener and then Marcus Phillips in game 2, and then, to go from there. Well, if Cincinnati wins that game, it's Marcus Phillips on the mound against a Cincinnati team that really wants to run. Yeah. And he's done, it should be said, he's done a better job holding runners the last couple times he's been on the mound. But we've seen what happens when he doesn't, and it's a real problem. So that could be an interesting little matchup. And oh, by the way, like, I don't mean to just like skirt past Wake Forest. Like, they're pretty talented too. They've got some guys who can really hit, and they play in a ballpark that plays pretty similar to Lindsey Nelson. So there's going to be a level of comfort there for Wake Forest offensively. So there's some interesting little things here. And then I guess for Tennessee, it's also just, is this going to be the Tennessee team that lost a whole bunch of home games this year? Or is it going to be a team that kind of flips a switch and starts playing a lot better? We'll see.
Yeah. You covered a lot of what I would have said. I think one thing I can add is Liam Doyle. His final regular season start at Arkansas did not go well. It was the worst start of his, certainly this season. Then against Texas, he was really fired up. And I think Tony's quote was he was trying to throw 2 complete games in 9 innings. He was just wired a little too tight. Now, I kind of like throwing him in game 1, and here's why. Because he can go out and overmatch a team. We're looking at Miami, Ohio. No offense, but they haven't seen what he's going to throw. And the other part of this is he's able to to not be perfect. He's able to not try to strike everybody out. He's able to just trust his stuff, which, he'll be successful if he can do that, and also get him right, assuming they advance. And he goes back to the scene of the crime in Fayetteville with a good outing under his belt instead of something different. Okay. Not to say he couldn't do that against Wake Forest in game 2, but I like my odds a little more if I'm playing the long game using him in game 1. And it's not like you don't have a good guy in Phillips, and with the way, that AJ Russell and Arvidsson, all those guys have had their moments to pitch. You have some other options, certainly, to follow Phillips to finish out a game, and then you might can win with offense from that point. I feel like this is an interesting regional again, because you mentioned the storylines with Phillips holding runners and potentially playing Cincinnati. Wake Forest, a team is supremely talented. We all love their talent in the preseason. Hasn't really played up to that, and they could unleash it. Just like for Tennessee, you have this reset. You get to the postseason, they should be comfortable in this environment as much as anybody can be in that raucous Lindsey Nelson Stadium. I feel like this is another one that I'm going to be glued to, because there's so many different ways this one could go. I think we know how a few of these regionals are going to go. This one for me is unpredictable because of the things that we've talked about. And I feel like Tennessee's a team, we all love their talent. No one's going to be surprised if they're, in the last 3 or 4 teams left in this whole thing. But I don't know that I would be surprised if they exited early either. It's just been that volatile a season for them. So it makes it fun to watch, man. You really don't know what you're going to get week to week from that club.
Yeah, everything is on the table there for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Let's move on to the regionals that are not hosted by SEC clubs. We'll start. These are in really no particular order, just kind of wrote them down as I saw them. But Alabama is the 2 seed in Hattiesburg. That's the 16 seed Southern, hosted by 16 seed Southern Miss.
Yep.
Also, there is Miami and Columbia. Kind of tricky in general. I mean, that's a tough opening matchup against Miami, a team that didn't look very good except for like the 3 weeks where they looked great.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what to do with that. What team is going to show up. Miami kind of laid an egg in the conference tournament, and so is this going to be a continuation of that? If so, Bama I think is in pretty good shape. And then the other question is that it really affects Bama is if they're able to get past Miami and Southern Miss beats Columbia. Did Southern Miss trust Matthew Adams to beat Columbia?
Mm-hmm.
Because if so, that means JB Middleton is on the mound against Alabama, and boy, that's a tough assignment. That guy is really, really good. And I think that's, Southern Miss is obviously, front of mind for a lot of SEC fans because you just see them midweek games and, there's a familiarity there. So I think folks know about JB Middleton, but I think that's going to have a big effect. Christian Ostrander is a pitching guy. Also strikes me, I don't know him well, but strikes me as a little bit of a traditionalist. Also, Columbia tends to be a tough 4. Yeah. Ivy Leagues in general tend to be tough 4s. Just ask Auburn 2 years ago. Or Virginia Tech in 2022 with Columbia. Mm-hmm. Both got to regional finals. So that's just going to be a big question, I think, because if Bama has to beat JB Middleton in a 1-0 game, that's obviously going to be one of the tougher tasks. Yeah, 100%.
Right. And then what does Alabama do pitching wise? Does Riley Quick throw game 1, which is kind of what I expect, but he's been pitching on Saturday all year. Tyler Fay has moved into the game 1 role with Zane Adams in the game 3 role. Fay threw, I guess, Tuesday in Hoover. What do they do? Tyler Fay, he's been their second best pitcher. He's been better than Adams down the stretch. What does that look like? How do they arrange it? Because selfishly, I would love to see Quick and Middleton on the same field dueling, and that would be fun for me. But I'm not taking any risk holding those guys, either one of them. So I do think that Alabama, they are a team that needs to hit home runs to score. Not that they have to, but they're certainly their best version happens in warm weather in Baseburg. The ball will fly. The other thing to point out is I've been to postseasons here that place will be rocking. It is not an easy place to play. They're going to shut out the opposing fans. They're not going to sell you tickets. It's going to be all black and mustard, and it's going to be, they're going to be on you. It's a really fun environment. If you're a neutral observer, I can't imagine as much fun as the opponent, unless you can shut them up, which is what these teams are going to be trying to do. I think the other thing that I'll point out, Southern Miss is a team, they have won 18 straight games heading into Sunday, playing their best ball at the end of the year like you want to do. It's a veteran lineup. And they've had some guys take some jumps that have been solid players in their career. And like Nick Monastery is now, he's like player of the year kind of guy. And JB Middleton, good player who kind of teased you a little bit with his talent, and he figured it out, and one of the best pitchers in the country. And when you have those elite transformative type of players, that's the ones I think advance. So they've got that, and a lot of sometimes we get a little SEC centric and don't always realize that there's some of these other teams have some really good players as well. So it'll be fascinating to see how Alabama, who certainly has a couple of those players themselves and quick, Justin LeBron's as talented as a player as we have in college baseball, and Cade Snell has turned into one of the best hitters. Talking about guys who don't strike out, he's one of those guys that just flat swing, puts the ball in play. I think they've got some players who kind of fit that bill too. So that'll be fascinating to see, especially if those teams end up playing 2 or 3 times. I think they're pretty evenly matched, and that could be, that could be it would be really riveting theater for all of us who are watching.
Move on to Tallahassee, where Mississippi State is the 3 seed. That one, of course, hosted by Florida State. The 2 seed is Northeastern, and the 4 seed is Bethune-Cookman. Notably, 2 of the top 6 winning streaks in the country are in this regional. Now, one of them is Bethune-Cookman. That's a 6-game winning streak, and that's like, that's a nice week. But Northeastern, however, has won 27 straight games. And
unbelievable.
This is a classic weekend of something's got to give, because on one hand, they've won 27 straight games and are, just playing really well. On the other hand, Northeastern traditionally does not play well in regionals under Mike Glavin. They've made it a couple times. They've never really shown much in those outings. Is this one going to be different? Certainly, Mississippi State, Northeastern plays to its potential. Mississippi State's going to have their hands full on Friday with that team. Best ERA in the country. Some of that's because they play in the CAA, which is not, especially this year, was not a particularly good league. So I get that. But take this team lightly at your own peril. Like they are good. You don't win 27 straight games by accident. So that's going to be tricky. And then, of course, Florida State has maybe the best 1-2 punch in the rotation in the country. They can really hit. The weakness there is the bullpen. If State's going to do something here, you feel like if they're in a regional final situation against Florida State, you've just got to get to the bullpen, because that's the soft underbelly. You can get to their bullpen, but you got to getting there is not the easiest thing in the world when you're dealing with Jamie Arnold and Joey Vellini and even Wes Mendez to some degree. So not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I think that Northeastern Mississippi State game Friday night, that might be one of my most anticipated matchups of the first round. I'm just fascinated to see how a team is so consistent that you don't have a clunker and you're able to win. You win your clunkers. You win 27 in a row. Regardless of competition. Good God. That's quite the feat. And then here they get the opportunity to play, one of the historic fan bases from the mighty SEC, and who comes in and expects to just roll right over you because they've never heard of you, and you get to play the chip on your shoulder game. And I do think that's, the sports writer again, that's just really fun storylines in order to key in on. And then whoever wins is sitting there grabbing Florida State and most likely Jamie Arnold in that Saturday night game. The thing, if you're Mississippi State, and this is an SEC show, that short porch in right field is going to be very inviting for the Hunter Hines and Ace Reese and even guys that are going oppo. It's going to be going to be something that they can take advantage of, because this version of Mississippi State hits the ball out of the park, and especially during their latest uptick, that offense has been much improved. I'll call it bordering on actually really good, and when you have a really good offense in the SEC, that makes you one of the best offenses in the country, and that's where Mississippi State has transformed into after being a little up and down through the year. One thing I've seen from State is the starting pitching has, I guess, solidified, we'll call it. But when they're going to the bullpen, there were some stretches where they might bring a guy in and he might not get an out, or he might give up 3 or 4 runs in a 2/3 of an inning or something like that. And it really minimized that. And as a result, they've just been more consistent. They've been more stable, less volatile kind of team. And the results have followed. And I think that's what it's going to take. They're going to get hit. You're going to have to take a punch this weekend. And are they able to withstand it and then, parry back and be able to take it? Because I do think Mississippi State's got a chance. Obviously, Florida State's the pick. They're playing at home. They've been one of the best teams all year. But I do think that because of the matchup, I don't hate it if I'm Mississippi State. And also they need to stay in the winner's bracket. So that means they've got to win on Saturday. But if they do, and you get into Florida State's pitchers, 4 through X, then okay, I'm not feeling so terrible about that. So, but again, that all starts with winning on Friday against a team that doesn't lose, and then being able to beat arguably the best pitcher in the country on Saturday. So, it's a steep climb, but once you get there, you would have a pretty good opportunity to finish the deal.
It's like they say, simple and easy are not the same thing.
Yeah,
those are not synonyms. Moving on to Oklahoma. Excuse me, I'm sounding like Mark over here. Oklahoma,
please not.
as the 2 seed in Chapel Hill. Also there, of course, the host North Carolina, Nebraska, Big Ten tournament champ, and Holy Cross, which secured their bid, I don't know, about 8 weeks ago, it feels like. So the biggest piece of news out of this one already is that Malachi Witherspoon is going to start for Oklahoma against Nebraska. I think in some way it serves a couple purposes. One, and I think this is the more minor of the two, one is that Malachi did not pitch in Hoover. And so it's like there is some urgency to get him on the mound and, and have him throw. The bigger thing, of course, is that it saves Kyson for a potential Saturday night matchup with North Carolina, which should be fantastic.
Electric.
Right? And you feel like if you're Oklahoma and you get there, and this is why I've said time and time again this year that Kyson is a cheat code for them, is like it didn't matter which regional they ended up in. If they win the opener and then throw Kyson against whoever, in this case North Carolina, they're going to feel like they should win that game, and they're right, and that's the whole thing. So I was pleased to see that Skip Johnson and staff made that decision because you're there to win a regional, not to win a couple games. And
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I really feel like that's the play there, because you could throw him against Nebraska. You throw Kyson against Nebraska. Like a lot of teams are going to throw their ace because you got to win the 2-3 game, right? And you probably win it, but then what do you do against North Carolina, who's going to have one of their 2-headed monsters throwing that game against you? Wouldn't like my chances near as much. However, if you think about this and the goal is to get to Saturday night undefeated, then the best option is to throw Malachi and then throw Kyson. And then you've got Cade Crossland, who's been pretty good, to pitch a potential Sunday game and against North Carolina's 3 or 4 guy, right? So I do think that if you're going to if the goal is, and for every program is different, okay, if you are first time in a regional or you hadn't been in a long time, longevity in it might be the play. Okay. If you're Oklahoma and you won regionals and you've been in the College World Series and you have a established program, established coaching staff who's not worried about job security, trying to win the regional and setting your pitching up in a way to maximize winning each game instead of the first game. I can get behind that. I understand why that's attractive. And I feel like, depending on each situation is different, but I like it for Oklahoma here. And I feel like it may not work, but I do think that the odds are improved going this direction versus, the standard way of, hey, let's throw a 1 or 2 or 3.
Yeah, agreed. That's kind of where I always come from. But it's a good caveat by you of just like, if you're a program in a different spot, maybe it is important that you stick around the regional a little bit.
Yeah. And also from a coaching standpoint, you can take some heat for not throwing your best guy in the first game. You go 0-2 and either you didn't throw your best guy or you threw him in a loser's bracket, in an elimination 0-1 game, then some coaches are going to feel a lot of heat over that, and they might not be in a position to really sustain that heat.
Yeah, it's a good point. All right, Kentucky is the 3 in Clemson. That is hosted, of course, by Clemson. The number 2 seed there is West Virginia. The 4 is USC Upstate. A little bit of familiarity there. West Virginia played in the Lexington Regional 2 years ago. Now, both those rosters are very different than they were then, but there is that. And this is another one where I haven't seen what Clemson is going to do, but they have one guy who is significantly better than anybody else they have, in Aiden Canuck. And so a win in the opener against WVU for Kentucky could end up being a matchup against Canuck, at which point you better be ready to hit a changeup, because that's a little like Trevor Hoffman. It's going to be change up, all 5 different speeds. One other thing, Runes brought this up on a podcast I recorded with the other guys earlier today, of just, it's been pretty clear for most of the season that Ben Cleaver is actually Kentucky's best starting pitcher.
Oh yeah.
But they've been pitching him on Sundays because that's where he started. And so I think they just kind of left him. Do they shake that up this weekend? I would guess so, but especially since he didn't pitch in Hoover, they were 1 and done. But that's what I would expect, but obviously we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one. I don't know who they pitch. With certainly they have different options. I mean, they could go McKay. I mean, they could go with Harris, who's been through pitching on Fridays for them anyway. Really, really talented kid too. But you're right. Cleaver's been their most effective guy all year. I know if you could win Friday without Cleaver and have him face up with Clemson, that gives you the best chance. Kind of like what we talked about with Oklahoma. It's just, can you, what does that look like on Friday? I mean, West Virginia won the Big 12. It's not like you can pitch off against them. So, but maybe matchups. I mean, Cleaver's a lefty. The other 2 are righties. You have some, some things to consider there. With styles make fights, right? So I think that Kentucky is a difficult matchup for a lot of teams just because they play differently. They're going to put pressure on you. They're going to take their hit batters. They're going to steal bases, and it's just a little bit different kind of approach that everybody doesn't play, and that does, in a short series like this where you might only play them once or twice, there can be some adjustment time. I do think that Clemson, they're one of those teams. They've lost to an SEC team last 2 postseasons. They lost to Tennessee and then to Florida. They probably weren't that tickled to see another one come through, especially one who was in Omaha last year. Although Clemson has had a much better year than Kentucky, but they had a much better year than Florida last year and Tennessee the year before. So I do feel like there's some, there's some demons that they would like to get rid of this weekend and knock off an SEC team before, and they would head to LSU should they win, and both those, that's the regional they're aligned to. I feel like Clemson is a very talented team, and they'll have a really good ballpark atmosphere going on. It'll be loud and they'll be into it. But Kentucky's not going to blink because they play 6 of the 16 hosts already. So they know what this looks like, and I feel like they'll be ready. The question for me is, can they handle West Virginia in that opener to make all of this Clemson talk meaningful from an SEC standpoint?
Bradley Smart will be at that regional for us. The whiz kid, Bradley Smart, many people are
He's killing it.
calling him. Mark, look, I'm not comfortable with how good he is at things. Like, I'm just not comfortable with that. He needs to be stopped, frankly.
Yeah.
Just it's just stop. Okay, we get it. You're talented. You're all the stuff. You can grow a great mustache, whatever.
Yeah.
The last regional here is Conway, where Florida is the number 2 seed, obviously hosted by Coastal Carolina. East Carolina is the 3, and Fairfield is the 4. East Carolina is kind of a scary name, but I'm not overly impressed. I think the American, once you get past UTSA, is not much. This was not their best year as a league, and so the fact that ECU didn't really have to go through UTSA, I think, really served them well. So I'm not, famous last words, but I'm not overly worried about that matchup there. But still, do you risk Liam Peterson in that game, or do you hold on to him? I don't really have a good recollection of what Sully tends to do in those situations, but they haven't really been a 2 very often. So I guess that's part of it, is we haven't had a lot of examples of that situation. I'll say this, though. I just saw Coastal Carolina, and this is not totally recency bias, but Florida is not really going to be able to just march in there. And especially as beat up as they are, Luke Heyman is kind of the newest arrival in the MASH unit. So Florida is not going to be able to just waltz in there and be like, we're an SEC team, therefore we're gonna dominate this thing. Like, Coastal's rotation is an SEC quality rotation. Caden Bodine is maybe the best catcher in the country. I was also talking to a scout at the Sun Belt tournament that said, like, Coastal does the fundamental stuff better than any other team he's seen this year. And oftentimes when people say that, you think defense, but his point was like, yes, but also, they go first or third on every single, and they score from second on every single. They tag up on every fly ball. And so it's just like relentless with Coastal. And so I'm intrigued by that, because I will be interested to see if the Florida magic continues.
Yeah.
And Coastal is just kind of a lot of fun to watch. So I would recommend, if you're just kind of cruising around, that Conway is a place that you land. But I'm fascinated by if this can continue for Florida, because it doesn't seem like the injuries have bothered them yet. But obviously the Heyman injury is a big one.
Yeah, it's tough. They are supposed to get Colby Shelton back, and having your shortstop back in the middle of the infield can shift some guys around. Bobby Bozer did a good job there while he was gone, but now he can go to third, and Lawson can go to first, and since Brody Donay is now the full-time catcher without Heyman, you're just kind of moving your chairs around. I do think that with Florida, getting Pierce Capola back has changed the way I feel about their pitching, because he was really good in his last outing against Alabama. I think he struck out, was that 10 in 3 innings or something like that? I mean, 3 in a piece. It was just a really, really strong effort, missed a lot of bats. And they've got Aiden King, who the last few weeks has been equally good. I mean, he's really turned it on as a freshman. So even if you throw Peterson in game 1 against East Carolina, one could argue that King and Capola have been just as good or not better than him down the stretch. And that does change the math for me, because I feel like I've got 3 potential, trusted starters. Now, I don't know how deep Capola will go, but certainly, yeah, he's been good. And if Florida gets to Clemente, the game's over, man. I mean, he's been that guy towards the back half of the year. So there's a lot to like there. That's not really a huge ballpark. I think Florida will hit some home runs. The question is going to be, for me, is are they going to pitch well enough, and can they handle Coastal's coastalness, right? Because they've just had so much success this year. It's kind of that season where everything comes together for a team, and they believe, and they're playing confident, and they big bad SEC comes in and they get to prove all the doubters wrong, and all of us people who are picking Florida to win this series, I'm sure it's plastered everywhere, all over the baseball office. They've got an opportunity to prove some people wrong and gain some national respect in a year that we thought they would be good, but I don't think anybody saw this coming, and certainly the way they're doing it with pitching. So I do think this is a 2-horse race. East Carolina's a good story to get here, and they've certainly got the regional pedigree to upset the apple cart, but I'm not sure that I like their chances, to beat Florida in that opener. And then it's a question of who wins that 1-0 game on Saturday with Florida. With the way that they've sustained injuries on the mound, I'm not sure that the losers bracket is a perfect avenue for them. They have some options and some young talented guys, but they would have to pitch better than they have previously. And but Sully figures this stuff out. He I'm not betting against him, but this is a challenging regional for Florida to try to win. I do think that if you're going to try to pick and choose which of the 1 seeds for Florida that you want to go to, I mean, this might not be the first one, but it's certainly not the last one either. And I think it's a decent matchup for them as they try to do the impossible and make another trip as an underdog back to Omaha.
Yeah, if Florida's going to come back through the losers bracket in this thing, they're going to need somewhere along the way the equivalent of Karsten Finvold to work some magic on the mound. I forget which postseason that was, but okay, yeah, we're just like, who is this guy? And he's just out there, with less than stellar stuff on paper, getting it done.
And he pitched again in the regional the year they lost to Oklahoma. And Oklahoma ended up going all the way, but I think he ended up giving them something in that regional as well. It's just, that is the cool thing, because someone like that, probably not at Florida just based on the odds, but someone somewhere is going to step forward and be somebody that pops up randomly on a podcast years later for two nerds to talk about. But that's really the fun part of this whole story is people are going to carve legacies this weekend. I mean, or add to them if they've already got them, and we're going to be a part of it and get to tell the story.
Yeah, no doubt. I've actually thought about that a little bit this week, that I do this every year. I look at the bracket and I say, like, gosh, it looks like it's just going to be a lot of chalk. And then it never is. I always talk myself into thinking like, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. And it just won't. There is a team out there who looks really good and is hosting a regional that's going to get eliminated in a home regional. Yeah. And we're going to go, what on earth happened there?
Yeah.
I mean, it just happens every year. So looking forward to it. Mark, I feel like we did pretty good. 1 hour and 8 minutes to get through all the SEC regionals. I feel like that's
voice held out.
Yeah. Voice is sounding great. Yeah. You're working through it. Really proud of you. I think that the listeners are as well. Some programming notes as we get out of here. First off, Mark is going to publish sometime later tonight. So as you're listening to this, should be up. Well, Mark, I'll tell you what. Why don't you give the rundown of what it is?
So
I'll butcher it.
Yeah. So what I did is I went through the SEC regionals, the ones that we just talked about, and I ranked them 1 to 13, the most likely that that team will win, like probabilities, right? And gave a little reasoning why. Then went through and picked for each of the 13 a key player that I think is important for that if that team's going to advance, here's why this player needs to really have a good week. And then went through and picked a few of the leading storylines. Didn't go 1 through 13. There's really not, you kind of be forcing it at that point. But what are the biggest things that I'm looking for, the narratives, whatever you want to call them, as we head into this weekend of regional play? What do you need to focus on? And then on top of that, I'm going to link all of this, some of this other stuff that we're doing. We mentioned what Bradley's doing with the stat pack, where you can go in, see where each player lined up at each position, how many games they played there, what their stats were, starting pitching, how they've done recently, so you can see the trends. We're going to link all that stuff in there too. So you can just kind of go to that one spot and there it is. And if you want to refer back to it during the weekend, it's all in one place. So I just thought that would be a useful tool as we try to keep up as we roll through this, what's going to be an incredible weekend of baseball.
Yeah, that should be great. A little bit of an HQ for SEC fans as a jumping off point to refer back to throughout the weekend. So that'll be great. Got to admit, I don't love the forecast for Friday, but we're going to be positive about it. At least here in Auburn. But we're going to be positive about it. We'll see what happens when it gets here. We're not gonna borrow that worry, as my therapist would tell me. I will have weekend waypoints as normal, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, my live streams each day of the weekend. Those will go as normal. Mark and I will probably record next week sometime around the same time, if I had to guess. Little regional recap, super regional preview. So there's that. We'll have writers at, I don't know, 8 sites, something like that.
Probably about half,
so plenty of SEC written coverage. So check all that out. It's going to be a smorgasbord all weekend. Watch Runes on Squeeze Play. I know I don't have to tell you all that, but just throw that plug in there. Watch Runes on Squeeze Play all weekend.
And I'll recap the SEC stuff for SEC Extra after each day.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of good stuff on the site, so should be a fun weekend for everyone involved. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors and Tecovas Boots for sponsoring this and every Highway to Hoover. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you, listener, for listening, and we'll talk.